Okay, so welcome to part 2 of our Whatever Happened To series, where we look into things that were used to be, or perhaps used to be, as we'll see tonight, part of our culture or religion in a very central way, which now seems to have kind of been lost in the dusts of history, and are just no longer spoken about or focused on. So, by raise of hands, who has ever heard of Ksav Ivri before? Most people, yeah. Okay, so who has ever read something along the lines, specifically in the world of academia or secularism, that the Jewish people, they think they have the Torah. They don't even have the Torah that they got at Har Sinai. With Shavuos coming up, I thought this would be a very meaningful discussion because there is a concept out there, as we'll see our core sources and what our tradition think about this notion. But the academic world will claim, based on a lot of archaeological findings and digs from the second period of the second Beis Hamikdash, second Temple period, that all the Hebrew that was written in that point of history is not the letters that we have today in our Torah, but it's very different letters. If you see source number 1, this is what Ksav Ivri looks like, or Ktav Ivri, or ancient Paleo Hebrew. Right, earlier today, or actually yesterday, Moshe Yolovsky sent me a program, right? A program that you wrote with help. Well, Chat GPT wrote it with the close tutelage of Moshe Yolovsky, where you could type in anything in Hebrew, and it'll come out with the I couldn't put any of it on source sheet because I didn't have the font downloaded. So when you put it in Word, it looks like gibberish. But if anyone I'm sure everyone has handled or looked at a 1 shekel coin before, right? It has ancient Hebrew, Paleo Hebrew text on it, 3 letters. If you have at home, if you have a 1 shekel coin, you can now translate what it means based on this little box that I gave you, and it says Yehud, Yud, Hey, Dalid on the back of the 1 shekel coin. I'll leave it up to your Wikipedia research later on to figure out why that word specifically made it on the 1 shekel coin. Interesting story, but there you have it in every Israeli's pocket. Maybe now that everyone pays with everything with their phone and credit card, maybe not. But at least 15 years ago, in every Israeli's pocket, mine included, we all had ancient, this Paleo Hebrew text right on the shekel coin. And in fact, pretty much 100% of any text that we dig up from the Second Temple period is in this writing. So where does our text come from? In fact, if we could ask it in a very in a front way, I guess the main question I want to delve into tonight is, does the Torah that we have today, does it match up letter for letter to the Torah that the Jewish people got from Har Sinai? Now, just to emphasize something before we get into really murky territories, no one is disagreeing with the notion that word for word, the meaning of the Torah, and in fact, even the pronunciation of Bereshit bara or Vayomer Hashem al Moshe Lemor has not changed an iota. We have what again, it's a little inaccurate to say we have behind me what the Jewish people received at Har Sinai, because the Jewish people received at Har Sinai the 613 mitzvos, not the Torah that we have behind us. That was given to the Jewish people either little by little through the travels of the desert, or the entire thing was given to the Jewish people at the end, right before Moshe died, and before they crossed through the Yarden, to the Jordan, to get to Israel, to get to Eretz Canaan. How do I know with absolute certainty that the Torah wasn't given to them like we have it in our own at Har Sinai? Anyone? Because you think if they knew what would happen based on sending the spies to Israel to spy out the land, shlach lecha anashim, and they knew that there would be a terrible punishment of having to stay for 40 years, and they were able to just flip ahead in the book and see the story, they wouldn't have made that mistake. If Moshe Rabbeinu would have known that as a punishment for hitting the rock, instead of talking to the rock, he would have to die before the Jewish people crossed and entered his whole life mission to bring the Jewish people into Israel was taken away from him. He wouldn't have made the mistake if he was able to flip ahead to chapter 19 and figure out what would happen at then. So obviously, and this is ubiquitous in the Gemara, the Chomisha Chomshei Torah that we have, it's an important clarification before we get to Shavuos, that what we read on every Shabbos wasn't the Sinai revelation. No. What happened at Har Sinai was the Jewish people were given the 613 mitzvos, which are all found in the Torah, which are an incredibly important and integral section of the Torah spread out between the Chomishei Torah. But the Torah itself is more than that. It's narratives, it's stories, it's lessons of the travels of the Jewish people through the desert, etc. And those weren't given to the Jewish people. Those were, according to one opinion, were given to us what's called Megillah. Megillah was given to us a little part by part as it happened. Like, this is what happened the past month, and that became that section of the Torah. And every month or 2 months or a year or 5 years, a certain section was given to them. And then before we crossed into the Yarden, Moshe helped us kind of sew it all together, literally and figuratively, into what we have today. Or the entire revelation of what we have today, Chomishei Torah, waited until the very end of the story, and then Moshe wrote down, according to the Torah itself, one for us, according to the Medrash. He actually wrote the Torah 12 times, one for each tribe, all identical, and gave the 12 tribes what the Torah that we have in all the shows around the world. Okay, but that, in other words, the meaning, the pronunciation, that definitely never changed according to all opinions. The only point of discussion, which we'll see in the Gemara, source number 2 and beyond in the commentaries, is how was that pronunciation and the words and the phonics represented? Was it represented in what we call Ksav Ashuris? Very important to get these terminologies straight. If you open up any Chumash in front of you, any Siddur in front of you, if we take the Torah out and roll it out, that's Ksav Ashuris. The classical Hebrew writing that me and you know how to read, right? Was it represented that way? Or was it represented, were the letters written in this very, to us, funny-looking Ksav Ivri, which in the academic world would be known as the ancient Paleo-Hebrew? And if that was the case, so then where did the writing, if the Torah was given to us in this funny, to us unrecognizable, aleph beis, right, and the way the letters are formed, so then where did the Hebrew that we know today come from? Where did that originate from? That's kind of what I wanted to try to discover today in the next little while that we have together. Yes?
Sorry, Rabbi, but the Rabbi said that the pronunciation was the same at Har Sinai as it is today, but today we have several different pronunciations. Ashkenaz, Sephardic.
Right. So it's a good question. So which one is right? So of course Ashkenaz is right. I'm just joking. That's true. So there is a certain lack of clarity as to how to pronounce certain words. I think we know Teimanim. They for a dalid they say th instead of da, which actually makes a lot of sense because there's a Gemara that we have that we're supposed to be ma'arichin bedalid. We're supposed to elongate the dalid of echad when we say Shema Yisrael, and this is found in the Gemara in the Shulchan Aruch. Now try to do echad and elongate the da. It's impossible because once it's off your tongue, it's gone. There's no way to elongate the touch of the tongue to the top of your palate. Da. It's just very staccato. There's no way to elongate it. But if it's a th sound with the tongue going kind of to the back of your teeth and breathing through it, so that you can elongate. So certain things, it does make sense to kind of admit that we might not have the perfect pronunciation. But what I will say is that whichever pronunciation we will commit to, Sephardic, Ashkenaz, etc. So according to that tradition, it never changed, right? So yeah, we don't know if there's certain discrepancies, but the discussion that we're having tonight is purely how the pronunciation was represented, not in the meaning or pronunciation of any of the words. Any other questions before we continue? No? Excellent. So, interesting. Greek writing would have come up later in history, even if. Right. This would have been so. We'll see. We'll see where it could come. Right. Assyria. Yeah. It could be. Yeah. We'll see. One, according to one opinion in the Gemara, that this was actually adopted after the between the first and second Beis Hamikdash. So that definitely could make a lot of sense. Fine. So let's see. We're going to be spending a nice amount of time on one Gemara, which, for clarity's sake, I labeled source number 2, but I split it up into 2a, 2b, and to 2c, and that's really going to be the rest of page 1, page 2, and the first half of page 3 are all going to be the same Gemara, which is found in Masechet Sanhedrin, Chaf Aleph Amid Beis, going into Chaf Beis Amid Aleph. And it's three opinions how to answer this core question. And each opinion, I think, is going to lead us to other questions and other things to discover. But I think the cleanest and most succinct way of having this discussion is to, number one, understand these three opinions in the Gemara. And then we'll see later sources and commentaries about which one of these opinions is, so to speak, accepted as our tradition. But all these three opinions, important to emphasize, are found in our Gemara. Okay? Opinion number one. So source number two, to be more specific, this is the opinion of Mar Zutra, V'itema Mar Okva, which means it was either one or the other. Some say it was Mar Zutra, some say it was Mar Okva. Either way, a very important Amora, which is the terminology and accolade that we give to the rabbis who lived in the times of the Gemara. The earlier, this might come into play depending on how in depth we go on this, but the earlier sources that were the rabbis of the times of the Mishnah are called the Tanaim, and the times of the Gemara are called the Amoraim. So Mar Ukva or Mar Zutra is one of the Amoraim, and he says like this. He gives a whole, check this out. He says, Betchila nitna Torah Yisrael b'Ksav Ivri. Initially, the Torah was given to the Jewish people in Ivri script, meaning to say, which one is that? That's the one we don't recognize, right? So boom, right over here. The Torah that we have behind us in every shul around the world, according to Mar Ukva and Mar Zutra, is not, if let's say it like this, according to them, if we were to have this amazing experience of being able to actually handle the Torah or the Luchos and see the 10 tablets that were given to Moshe at Har Sinai, we wouldn't be able to read them. We need to take this out and decipher what it means, right? Anochi Hashem Elokecha would look like it does in the Ksav Ivri. We wouldn't be able to actually read them, right? Pretty wild take. And then he tells us that Chazra v'nitna lahem bimei Ezra b'Ksav Ashuris. In the times of Ezra HaSofer, right, we're going to discover a little bit about his magnitude, about the influence that he had on the Jewish people. So in the times of Ezra HaSofer, so then he changed the way the language was written from the original Ksav Ivri, and he changed it to what we have now, Ksav Ashuris. Why? Huh? Good question. Hold on to that. That's going to be a major question we'll need to discover. Why would Ezra change it? Good.
Maybe because he was a sultan.
I would say it's harder to write. Yeah, I would say sorry, more beautiful, maybe, but I would say it's harder to write. Okay. So then, Biru lahen liYisrael Ksav Ashuris. I just want to be very intellectually honest over here that if you do look at the Gemara inside, I am simplifying this opinion a little bit for sake of clarity. But everything over here is accurate. I'm just leaving out certain details that would make it, for our context, more complicated to understand. And the Jewish people, so to speak, chose for themselves, like, hey, I really like the way this Ezra Sofer rabbi is writing Hebrew. We're going to go with this one. Let's ditch the original one that God gave us at Har Sinai. Let's go. I like this one. It's very beautiful. Okay, so that's the history that this first opinion tells us. Now, just to continue this first opinion a little bit, Tani Rabbi Yossi, Omer Rabbi Yossi continues and teaches that Ra'oi Haya Ezra Shenitna Shetinasin Torah Al Yado Yisrael Ilamale Kadmu Moshe. If it wasn't for Moshe having taken the opportunity, so to speak, to bring down the Torah at Har Sinai, Ezra would have been the next man up to plate. Like Ezra was actually the type of person at the level who really was suitable to represent the generation to bring down the Torah. But Moshe got there before him. But still, the Gemara continues. Okay, I'm going to skip a little bit. It's page number 2. The Gemara continues that even though he didn't get to give the Torah, but still what he did is he was able to actually change the way the Torah was written, right? And the Gemara finishes off and says, V'lama nikra Ashuris. Why is it called Ashuris according to this first explanation, Mar Ukva, Mar Zutra? Well, very easy. It's because it ascended from Ashur, which is Assyria, which would nowadays be modern day Iraq, probably, right? And when the Jewish people were there and stuck there, now Ezra Sofer was saying, okay, it's time to go back to build the second base of Mikdash. This is kind of all happening just around the same time as the Purim story, right? It's around the same time that Ezra was trying to round up the troops to go back to Israel and take the Jewish people out of the exile, which was the direct aftermath of the destruction of the Bayis Rishon, the first temple. The Jewish people were now outside of Israel, and they said, let's go back to Israel and rebuild the second base of Mikdash. That was Ezra. And he, part of that whole engagement to the Jewish people, and we'll hopefully get to sources which will say exactly why he did this, but he actively changed, according to this opinion, the way the Torah was written. So there was 2 times in history, Torah, let's call it 1.0, but the Torah itself never changed. I want to continue to emphasize that, was written in a language that we would not understand today. And now we have the post-Ezra version, era, the Ezra era version of the Torah written in what we call Ksav, which was a non-Jewish way of writing in Assyria. This is how the way we read our Torah is the way the culture around us in Assyria wrote their local language, and we adopted their language and we transposed it to the Hebrew language. Like in our transliteration, we have English translator considers Yit Kadav, Yit Kadash, Y-I-T, right? So that's what we did. We took the local language of where we were and we rewrote the Torah in that language. That's opinion number 1. Okay? So now, I think I just posed a couple questions over here on the source sheet. So this opinion, just to summarize, asserts that the Torah was given at Har Sinai was not given in the same script that we use today, but rather in ancient Paleo-Hebrew. Now, I want to know, does this bother us? Maybe. It doesn't matter. If the words are the same, the meaning is the same, the translation is the same, so maybe it doesn't matter. And as we will see, this did bother many thinkers, as I think it should bother us as well. We'll see some other sources, but for example, we will see a lot of different Gemaras, which and later sources as well, that connect deep meaning not only to the Hebrew language, but to the way we write the Hebrew language. So if it's literally a non-Jewish language that was a way of writing a language that was adopted from Syria, from Assuris, so how could we now say, well, it has some deep mystical meaning? And like for example, the Lamed, the way we read it in the Torah, is really a Chaf and a Vav, which has a numeric value of 26, which is the same numeric value of Yud K Vav K. And we have like a lot of Torah about that. Or the Gemara tells us that the word emes, compared to the word sheker, the Gemara in Shabbos tells us that emes means truth. And how do we know that emes is true? Because the aleph, the mem, and the taf, not only is it the first, last, and middle letter, but all 3 letters have what's called a moshav, like a strong base to it. Exactly. If you think of the aleph, there's like 2 legs, very sturdy. The mem is flat on the bottom, and the taf also has 2 legs it comes down to, right? But sheker, right, is very, you could lie, I may believe you now, but in a couple of years from now, I'm going to hear you say something else, and it's all going to come crashing down, right? Lies will never endure forever. Only truth will endure forever. And if you look at the letters of sheker, shin, like the shin comes kind of to a point at the bottom, so it's like very tippy, right? And the kuf also is very pointy. And the reish, exactly, very good. Not the Ashkenaz, okay. I thought I'd be able to slip that one under. But the reish also only comes to 1 point, so they all fall over very easily. So MS is very sturdy, sheker is very shaky, okay. So that works very well if you write the Torah on Ksav Ashuras. But if you look over here on the graph that I have on source number 1, it just doesn't work. Like the aleph isn't sturdy. Let's see, the mem is not sturdy. And the taf is, okay, the taf is sturdy. 2 out of 3 letters for MS is sturdy. And for sheker, the shin is very sturdy. It's a W. It's got 2. Right, yeah. And the kuf is not, and the reish is not. So it's just the whole line of thinking just doesn't work, right? The Gemara says another beautiful thing also on Masechet Shabbos, on the same section, same daf, I think, where like every letter represents an idea, and you can learn a lot of beautiful lessons. For example, the Gimel represents Gemilut Chasadim, which means to give and help other people. And the Dalid, this is the Gemara Shabbos, represents Dalim, which means a poor person. So if you picture in your mind's eye or look at the graph, in our Hebrew, in Ksav Ashuras, the leg of the Dalid is running towards, the leg of the Gimel, right, is running towards the Dalid, the next letter. So you should run and find people who need your help and help them. But Also notice that the face of the Dalit is facing away from the Gimel. Because when you help other people, do it when they're not looking. Do it so they're not embarrassed. Do it so you can give in an anonymous way, which is the highest level of chesed. But these are all things that the Gemara tells us by the shape that we have the letter teaches us all these beautiful, deep morals of either mystical things, of the names of God are hidden in every single letter, or it teaches us very concrete, down-to-earth lessons about truth and falsehood and how you're supposed to give and, etc. But none of these lessons work if we assume that the Torah was given in Ksav Ivri. Right? So that's, in other words, what I'm trying to say is that we shouldn't be thinking, well, that's okay. The Torah is the Torah. It meant the same thing. It should bother us if we would need to conclude, according to this first opinion, that the Torah was not given in the tried and tested lettering that we have today, Ksav Rishus and our Torahs. Okay, but that is only the first opinion. We also have two other opinions in the Gemara. The second opinion.
Sorry, quick question.
Yeah.
The Ksav Ashui, do we know for a fact that was being employed at that time in Assyria? We don't. I'll have to admit a little. Based on my research, I haven't found any proof that the locals, the non-Jewish locals of that period of time were using this lettering. No. But We don't know what they were using.
Huh? We don't know that they weren't using it.
But we don't know for sure. We don't know.
Right. We don't have any non-Jewish secular Assyrian documentation of their history books written in this period of time that were from a different language but written in our Aleph base. Ashurus. We don't have that. Okay, but that, yeah.
What about the Dead Sea Scrolls?
Excellent. Some of them are written in Ksav Ashurus. Some of them are written in Ksav Ivris. In fact, yeah. So it's very interesting. Even now today, I think the number is about 10,000-ish. There are a certain sect of Judaism called the Shomronim. Okay, or in Talmudic literature, they would call the Kutim, and the Kutim are a very intriguing piece of history. That after the destruction of the first base in Mikdash, Nebuchadnezzar dispersed the Jewish people, the 10 tribes, the 10 lost tribes, outside of Israel, and he reimplanted people from other countries to Israel to inhabit northern Israel because the 10 tribes were gone, and he wanted people to live there. So he took non-Jewish people and moved them into Israel, and those non-Jewish people were, this is all in Tanakh already, were attacked by lions and didn't know what to do. So they went to the Kohanim at the time and said, what should we do? And he said, well, it's because you're living in Israel and you're not accepting the Torah, so these lions are attacking you. So the entire nation of Shomronim converted to Judaism. And it's a big machlokas dispute in the Gemara if they're considered Jewish or not, because they didn't accept the Torah. They just wanted the attack of the lions to stop. In fact, the Gemara, aside from calling them Kutim, also calls them Geirei Arayot, which means the converts of the lions. Okay? Halachically speaking, the conclusion of the Gemara is they're not considered Jewish, right? So there's like one or two Moshavim in Israel, one near like Kfar Tapuach, like not so far from Yerushalayim, that they are religious Kutim, right? Shomronim. Right? And if you look at their Torahs, they still have Torahs in their synagogues, and they write their Torahs in Ktav Ivri, in this old, right? That's how they write it. Unbelievable. Yes. They're kind of like Karayim in that they accept the Torah, but they don't accept the written Torah. So they're like most practices we don't have in common, but they do have a basic Torah, the same as ours, word for word, apparently, but just written in Ksav Ivri, not Ksav Ashurus. Yeah.
The lions shouldn't have stopped.
Huh? They accept the written law. Yeah, but their history, they come from great grandparents who their conversion wasn't valid. So they're not going to be more Jewish. You were there? Yes, yeah. The whole time that we had the Beis HaMikdash, historically, in Yerushalayim, they had their own temple near Har Grizim and Har Evel, like having their own.
They have their own thing, and we met with these guys.
Yeah.
We met with the Kohen as well.
Yeah. Yeah, they still do it, but on Har Grizim, Har Evel, right? Yeah.
And but they had a book, this Kohen Gadol, that he was descendant from, and they have it written down how he's descended
Right.
from Aaron HaKohen.
Oh wow. Yeah. They definitely believe. So they
I don't know.
Huh? You could, because there's in Ksav Ivri. Next time, go with this. Yeah, wow. So they definitely believe that they're the real Jews and we're not.
they would definitely marry us if we let them. They believe that we're also Jewish, that just we missed the boat with this whole, through the exile after the first base and make this destruction, we kind of lost the North Star with this whole Ksav Ashuris Ezra Sofer guy that they don't agree with, but they believe we're Jewish, right? And we believe they're not, so they're kind of stuck. I believe they have, like, I read this article that they have a very small gene pool that they can marry, so they unfortunately have a lot of genetic issues because it's basically like 150 families marrying each other, for the past, many years. Yeah.
So if that's the case and it didn't convert correctly, then the Lions shouldn't have stopped attacking them.
So I don't know if it stopped right away or not, but, or if that was, okay. I don't know. I'm pleading the fifth and knowing all the details of that history. But I do know it's a discussion, and I think the fourth parak of Kedushin, whether or not they're considered Jewish or not, and the conclusion halachically that we find in the Gemara and the Shulchan Aruch is they're not considered halachic Jews. Okay. Unlike the Karaim that we spoke about a couple weeks ago, that are considered Jewish, but maybe they don't do their divorces properly enough, so they might be all considered mamzerim, which is another reason why we can't marry allow one of the Karaites to marry. It's a different problem. They're Jewish, but they haven't been doing proper divorces for the past hundreds and hundreds of years. At the very origin of the Quran, much closer in history. So then, well, first of all, it could be those rabbis wouldn't agree with the assertion that I was making, even though the rabbis were saying back then, like the Rambam and the Radvaz were saying, don't marry the Karaites. It could have been happening anyways. Nowadays, it doesn't happen. When the rabbis say don't do something, everyone listens. But back then, back then there were detractors, right? So it could be that the rabbis are don't, and yet we find hundreds of ksubas with this blended marriage between the Karaim and the Jews, right? But yeah, very interesting. Okay, opinion number 2. So that's opinion number 1. Originally, it was given in Ksav Ivri, and then in times of Ezra, it was changed. Okay, why it was changed? Let's hold on a little bit. Okay, the second opinion is Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi. Tanya Rebbe Omer. Anytime the Gemara says Rebbe, it's referring to Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi. Okay, so he says like this: Betchila b'Ksav zenit na Torah l'Yisrael. Initially, the Torah was given to the Jewish people in this script, i.e., our script, Ashuris. Okay, so okay, we got someone who already said it, that our Torah, if we would get a glimpse of the Torah that Moshe got from Hashem, or the Luchos that Moshe brought down from Hashem, we'd be able to read it no problem. Anochi Hashem Elokecha, right? It's the same as ours, right? You know the movie from like many years ago, the Ten Commandments. If you look online, look at the commandments. It was they have it written in Ksav Ivri, right? Not in our right. So that would be according to the first opinion. According to the second opinion, right? If the screenwriters would have called Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, hey, how do we do this? They say, no, write it like all the Jews have it on the top of their Aron Kodesh with the letters that they have in the Torah now, right? That's this opinion. So what happened? So Kevan Shechatu, there was a time in history that the Jewish people fell into sin. Okay, this is very ambiguous. When was this? What was the sin? We don't know. Hold on. So, but whenever that happened, Nepach lahen laroetz, Kevan Shechazer lehem ichzir lehem, Shneamar shuvu livtzar nasiri hatikva gam hayom mag mishnah ashiv lecha. So essentially, what this is saying is that there was a time of sin, that the way we wrote the Torah got demoted from Ksav Ashuris, what we have now, the holier script, the one that God gave the Jewish people. This is very opposite of the first opinion. That was a non-Jewish language that was picked up and adopted in history. No, this second opinion says this is the God-given language, the way we have the Torah. But we, at some point in history, got demoted to Ksav Ivri. We weren't allowed in our sinning state to use that divine holy script of Ashuris, the one we have now. We got demoted to the scraggly-looking one that we can't recognize, Ksav Ivri. But then there was another point in time, which is yet again left very ambiguous. We'll see what this means from the commentaries, that we were able to readopt in the times of Ezra. We were able to readopt the original and reenact the original way the Torah was given to us in Ksav Ashuris. So it was given in Ksav Ashuris. We have it in Ksav Ashuris. So we, at Har Sinai and 2023, are kind of the two ends of the Oreo cookie. And then there was some period in between, we'll call it the white in the middle of the Oreo cookie, that we were not allowed to use the Torah as it was given to us, but we had to switch it and adopt to Ksav Ivri. Okay, so now, if you remember, according to the first opinion, why was the script that we have today called Ksav Ashuris? Because it came from Assyria, and it was a non-Jewish language that we adopted.
So now we have to re-ask that question because we're claiming, the second opinion is claiming that that's not true, but rather it was a divinely given script. So why is it called Ksav Ashuris, which seemed to imply before that it was an Assyrian script? So now, Lama Nikre Shema Ashuris, Shem Me'ushares Biksav. Why is it called Ashuris? Because it's very Me'ushares. What's Me'ushares? Ashrei Yoshvei Ve'isecha. What's Ashrei mean with an aleph? Huh? Praiseworthy, beautiful. Why is it praiseworthy, beautiful? So it means because it's beautiful and straight. In fact, I think this is an objective take. The Gemara is saying it. If you compare the two scripts, if you compare the two scripts to each other, the script that we have today is more beautiful. It looks like hieroglyphics. It looks like a lot of the letters look very similar to the other ones. So they're not as distinct. It looks very scrappy, right? The letters we have now are much more beautiful. And that's what the Gemara is saying. Why is it called Ksav Ashuris? Because it's very mu'ushar. It's very beautiful. That's it. That's why it's called Ashuris. That's the second opinion. Okay, the third opinion. So, okay, points to think about in the second opinion is according to this script, we have today what was given to us at Har Sinai. So that's a big relief that we have already one opinion to kind of hold on to. Okay, there was a period in our time that was given that we had to demote down to Ksav Ivri, but we restored it in the times of Ezra. Now, a point to think about is what point in history is this opinion referring to that we sinned and therefore the Ksav got demoted, and when was the time that we did shuva, so to speak, repentance, and we're able to bring back the Ksav Ashuris. Okay, so we'll see in source number 11 a very intriguing take on exactly how to fill in the specifics of those very ambiguous descriptions in history. Okay, the third opinion is Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar. Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar says that no, Ksav Zel lo nishtana kol ikar. It was all babkis. All these changing, it never happened. Ksav Ivri was never part of our history. It's not true. It was always Ksav Ashuris. Okay? So all the archaeological digs is going to be a very big question according to the third opinion. In fact, now that we know through maybe archaeology or later findings in history, it's on a pragmatic level. This third opinion would be the hardest to accept because this is the first opinion that we're saying that Ksav Ivri, which we find so much of, Dead Sea Scrolls, etc., was never a part of our history. It never changed. And very interesting, one of so he brings two proofs. Proof number one, which I actually have separately as a source, and source number 3, the Torah tells us in Parshas Pekudei, Vavei Ha'amudim, right? And these are the little hooks that held the different what's the word I'm looking for in the sections or drapes, tapestries in the Mishkan. The Mishkan, unlike the Beis HaMikdash, wasn't brick and mortar. It was just hide and knitted drapes that were connected. So how come they weren't just falling by way of gravity? Because they were connected at the top with these little hooks. And the way the Torah calls these hooks, they call the hooks vavei ha'amudim, the hooks, right? In other words, the word for a hook is a vav. Why? Arguably, because the vav kind of looks like a hook, right? Problem is, not the problem for us, it's a relief. But if you look at Ksav Ivri, turn back to source number 1, the vav doesn't look like a hook. Does it? Like a Y? Maybe you could. Okay. Arguably, this Gemara, or this, not Gemara, the Pasuk in the Torah works a lot better if you assume that the Torah was written in Ksav Ashur. So that's one proof that this third opinion is saying that the Torah was given, never changed, always as a vav. The second opinion is actually, the second proof that he brings is very interesting as well, that in Megillas Esther, when it came time for the Jewish people to write letters to all the people in Shushan Habira and in the outskirts, the other countries, that Haman's decree was rescinded and we're able to defend ourselves and it's a happy time and let's all dress up and eat hamantashen and do everything and read the Megillah for all the years to come. So it tells us, Ve'el HaYehudim, they wrote letters to the Jewish people, Kichsavam ukilishonam, right? In their language and in their script, right? Which is redundant. Like you're writing in English. You don't have to say, I'm writing you a letter in English and I'm going to use the English alphabet. So it connects the two. So we can understand based on that ma lishonam lo nishtana af
Ksavam lo nishtana. The Gemara tries to extrapolate this sort of opinion that just like our language, Hebrew never changed. That's ubiquitous. Everyone agrees to that. So our way of writing language also never changed. So there you have it. That is, I told you we'd be spending an unproportionate amount of time on this Gemara. We have three opinions. Opinion number one, that it was originally given, Har Sinai, like the movie from 20-some years ago, in Ksav Ivri. In the times of Ezra HaSofer, it was changed. Amazing power of Ezra HaSofer, according to the first opinion. It was changed to Ksav Ashuris like we have it now. Opinion number two, no. It was originally given in Ksav Ashuris. There was some temporary time in history that the Jewish people sinned, and it had to be demoted to Ksav Ivris. And then at times of Ezra, he was able to restore the way the Torah was originally given, the way we have it now. Okay. The third opinion is no. It was Ksav Ivri never existed in the Jewish tradition. It was always Ksav Ashuris. Fine. Now, other sources which are going to be important for us to try to understand which one is right, so to speak. Source number four. Source number four is a Gemara Megillah Daf Beis Amud Beis. Amar Rabbi Yirmiyah Minatzpach Tsufim Amrim. Minatzpach. What's special about those letters? Minatzpach, Mem, Nun, Tzadi, Pei, and Chaf. Those 5 letters, huh? Those 5 letters of Minatzpach. It's just an acronym to remember. Which 5 letters have a different script for when it's the last letter of a word? Mem and the Mem, or Mem Sofit. And then you have Nun, and you have Nun Sofit, Tzadik, Sofit, Pei, and Chaf as well. All the other letters, doesn't matter if it's in the middle of the word, the beginning or the end, it's always going to be the same. And the Gemara tells us that was instituted by the prophets, by the Nevi'im, by the Tzufim, people who were the seers of the Jewish people. The Gemara says, V'tizbra, could that really be? A Navi is not allowed to add anything that the Torah didn't originally institute. So how could the Nevi'im come and add these end letters? The Gemara answers, no. They originally were instated, and for some mysterious period of history of time, they were forgotten, and the prophets came and reinstituted the ways to write the mem and etc. at the end of the word. Okay, which opinion does that sound like? Sounds like the second opinion. That right? Because first of all, if you look at Ksav Ivri, there's no way to differentiate any of the letters between the middle of the word and end of the word. But the fact is, how could we have a period of time that we forgot how to write the end letters? Just open up a Torah. Must be that this Gemara is agreeing to the second opinion that there was a period of time that we weren't allowed to use Ksav Ashuris. So we couldn't just open up the Torah and find the end mem or the end sadi or the end chaf, because it was written in Ksav Ivri for those hundreds and hundreds of years. So if that's true, we forgot how to write them. So the prophets came back, Yeshaya, Cheskel, etc. They came back and they reinstituted the ways of writing writing the letters at the end of the word. Okay, so that is just an important source to lend credence to the second opinion. Source number 5. Amar of Chizda, Mem v'samach shabaluchos b'neis hayu omdim. The mem, or more accurately, the end mem, and the samach on the luchos were miraculous. Why were they miraculous? Huh? Exactly, because the luchos were cut straight through. Not like the movie, right? But that's okay. Cut straight through. And if you think of the samach or the end mem, it's circular. So if it's cut straight through, that like if I'm standing on one side, you're on the other, I say, hey, how are you? I could peer right through. So the middle must have been hovering there. Oh, that's a miracle. Okay. Now, if you look at Ksav Ivri, look at the mem. Do you need a miracle to write the mem or the samach? No miracles needed. Right? First of all, there is no end mem, so it must be the regular mem it's referring to. And it looks like a W with like a Y connected to it. You don't need any miracles. And the samach is like 3 horizontal lines with one vertical line. You don't need a miracle. There's only 1 letter, 2 letters that you need a miracle for. Really 3. I guess Dalid, Ayin, and Tes, and Kuf, and Reish. You need lots of miracles actually, but you wouldn't need a miracle for that. Okay, very interesting. Okay, so it happens to be we're going to just to go very quickly through the next couple sources. Presumably the same as we do from. Yeah, good question. Oh well, it's starting that way even for us. I think that's just the way this graphic was made. I don't think it's indicative. I believe that the Dead Sea Scrolls that are written in Ivri is the same direction. It's from
it is from right to left. But yeah, I'm not 100% sure.
But not all the Dead Sea Scrolls are written.
Some are, yeah, you have a mix. Some are written in Ashur, and some are written in Ivri. Right. Fine. Okay, we're going to skip over source number 6. Very interesting, but it'll come into play a little later. Now, this is quite baffling. Okay, Sefer HaIkarim. Sefer HaIkarim was, so he was just after the Rambam, and he was a big, very, Rav Yosef Albo. You have a little mini biography on the bottom in the footnote. Rav Yosef Albo wrote a Sefer HaIkarim, and he writes that the Jewish people, when we were Olu mi Bavel, when we left Syria, Babylonia, and going back to Israel to start building the second base of Mikdash, he says we took 2 things with us. Okay, the first thing is that we took Ha'echad. This first line I bolded it, and we're going to go into the underline. Shehinichu Ksav Ivri ubachru lehem Ksav Ashuri zecher shagalu el Ashur v'nigalu misham. As a memorabilia, as a remembrance. Like on Friday night, we make a kiddush, Zecher Li'Yetzias Mitzrayim, or Zecher L'Maaseh Bereishis. We want to remember core major events in Jewish history. So to remember the Exodus, not of Egypt, but the Exodus from Bavel, which was a tremendously huge moment in Jewish history. So Ezra HaSofer, who's kind of the Moshe Rabbeinu of that second Exodus, wanted to make sure that for all of future history, the Jewish people will remember this day. So what are we going to do? 2 things. Number 1, we're going to rewrite our Torah in this language of the locals. Can you imagine such a thing? Like when most of the North American Jews end up in Israel, let's switch our Torah to English, right? Bereshis bara, B-E-R, right? That's basically what Rav Yosef, Rav Yosef Albo is saying. He's essentially saying that the correct opinion is the first opinion, right? That's what he's saying. He's just explaining all the unsaids and unspokens and ambiguities in the first opinion. Well, why would Ezra do that? Okay, it was originally given in Ivri, and then Ezra switched to Ashurus, but why would he do that? He says, well, it was to commemorate and to make sure that the Jewish people never forgot. It was essentially like instead of making a new Pesach, it's just let's switch the Torah language to the local language of Bavel, right, of Ashurus. So every time we look at the Torah, we remember the magnitude of today, of the day that we had the second Exodus, not of Mitzrayim, but of Bavel back to Yerushalayim. Okay, that is the first. The second thing that we did is, he says, we switched from counting the dates. If you look in the Torah, if you look in Tanakh, right, the Nisan is never called Nisan, right? Tishrei is never called Tishrei. They're all called Chodesh Rishon, Sheni, and it all started from Nisan. Why did it start from Nisan? Because right when the Jewish people left Egypt, Hashem told the Jewish people, this is going to be the first month. Chodesh Hazel Lachem. Nisan is going to be the first month, and it's going to be the second, third, fourth month from Nisan. So when Ezra came out, he says, well, we don't have to talk about Egypt anymore so much. We could de-emphasize that and now start emphasizing the new Exodus. So he switched the names to the local names from Bavel, and they're all essentially referencing different avodah zaras, idolatries that they had. And those are the names of the different months that we have. So those 2 memorabilias, he says, Yosef Alba says the Jewish people picked up. Number 8 we'll skip over because of the time, but this is the Maharal saying you can't even say what Rav Yosef Albo said. It's not allowed. He said, he writes over here that Rav Yosef Albo needs to v'tzarachu kapara al davar zeh. He's got to do tshuva on Yom Kippur for writing and publishing these words. Chas v'shalom. You can't say such a thing. How could you say such a thing? That we needed a memorabilia to forget Egypt and to re-emphasize Bavel. He says, Rabbi, the Maharal came way later in history. He was in the 1500s. But he says, 200, you have to, Rav Yosef Albo, you got to do tshuva for saying what you said. No good. He says, we can't accept that. Fine. Source number 9 and source number 10 are both, Rabbeinu Hananel and the Rambam are supporting opinion 2 or 3, which is the opinions that we'd be more comfortable with today, which the Maharal certainly would agree with also. The opinions that the Torah was given to us in the lettering that we have it today, in Ksav Ashuras, and something happened in the interim where we lost it. I just want to read you one line from the Rambam over here. He says, V'aksav asher kasav, I underlined in bold, V'aksav asher kasav yisparach HaTorah. The Ksav Ashuras is the same writing that Hashem gave us at Har Sinai. And now, whether or not it never changed or it changed, but we got it back, so that he's not really helping us with, but at least he is writing very clearly that the lettering that we have today is the same lettering that we have at Har Sinai. Number 11 is super fascinating. This is a letter that the Rambam wrote, which means that the Hebrew we have on the page would be a translation from the original Arabic, because the Rambam wrote everything that he wrote, with exception to 2 publications, he wrote in Arabic, which was the spoken language at the time. He was living in Cairo, right? And then he writes like this. He says, I'm starting from the underline in bold. Hol ubo nitna Torah commotion is bar. Since we've already explained that Ksav Ashuris is the language that the Jewish people received the Torah in. Ubo nichtavu luchos abris, and that's what the luchos were written, the writing that we have now in our Torah. Maguna lihishtamesh bo chutz me'asher bekisvei hakodesh. It's demeaning and below the sanctity of those letterings to use it in any mundane areas of life. And below pasku yisrael milishtamesh b'zeh. And the Jewish people always protected and reserved the special Ksav Ashuris, the letters that we have in the Torah, only for Torah usages. V'hayu igrosehem b'chiburei hachachmosehem b'kisvei choshalem b'ksav Ivri levad. But anytime they would write a sign on the street, or letters on the back of the shekel coin, or anytime they would make a matzeva for a dead person, anything we would archaeologically dig up from this period of time, we always would make sure to use a different way of writing Hebrew, Ksav Ivri. And that's why we don't recognize any of the Hebrew that we dig up in archaeological digs, because it's not Torah. If we would find the Sefer Torah from that day, the Rama would push on this, that it would be written the same way that we have it now. But it was always something that was protected to only use for divine, for holy endeavors. Anytime you find any currencies, Dvarim Shachol, B'Ksav Ivri, you're always going to find it in Ksav Ivri. So the Rambam says that the Jewish people always reserved the Ashura script for Torah and holy works. I think that's interesting to kind of think about this in the context that it seems that the Jewish people always had a secondary language. Yiddish, or you have Ladino or Gorski, language of the Kavkazi Jews. We always seem to have 2 languages, and I think we could perhaps posit that it's kind of for the same reason. Even before the secondary languages became a thing for Jewish people, we had a secondary way of writing Hebrew to preserve the sanctity of our text and to make sure we're only using the lettering that God gave us as Jewish people. We're only using that for Torah and for tefillah, but for anything mundane, political, or non-Torah, we had a secondary way of writing, which was Ksav Ivri. I'm just going to take questions soon, but I just want to get to our very last source. Absolutely fascinating. The Shalos and Shuvas of the Radvaz. This is Rav David ben Zimra, who was born in the late 1400s in Spain, and after the expulsion, he went to Tzfat, and from there he made his way to Cairo and became the chief rabbi, obviously, quite significantly after the Rambam, but they did share the same job. And he, first of all, writes that he's very bothered with this notion that Rav Yosef Albo writes about, or the first opinion in the Gemara that we learned together, writes that the Torah was originally given in Ksav Ivri. He's extremely bothered by this, and he just writes, V'or kasha shaharei sodos gedolos mikubalos ish mipi ish, these great lofty secrets of the Torah that are hidden down in the tzir ha'osios, the betzir ha'shemes tzliyim behem, in the way that we write the letters. And many works, Svarim Rabbi said, there's many works been published about the secrets of the Aleph Beis, and it's all dependent on the way we write them. Rabbi in Yerushalayim, Rav Yosef Kamenetsky, pointed out that he himself, the Radvaz, wrote a sefer called Magen David, which is all about the secrets of the Aleph Beis. So when he writes, well, what are we going to do with all these books that were published about this topic? He's probably referring to his own work, right? You can't tell me it was written in Ivri. I wrote a book about this. What are we going to do about my book? Right, but it doesn't take away from his point that there's all we pointed out Gemaras already, the way the Gimel is facing the Dalet and Emes and Sheker. There's many truths and moral secrets that are hidden in the way we write, not just the Hebrew language, the way it is, but the way we write it. So how can we negate all of that? And then he says, unbelievably, he says, just like we'll skip the second point, we'll go straight to the third point, and he says something absolutely unbelievable. He says he suggests a solution in all of this, and he says that the Torah was first given to us in Ksav Ashuris. He's essentially saying that the halacha is like the second opinion, but again, he's filling in all the gaps, all the ambiguities that we didn't know about. What does it mean when the Torah says that when we sinned, it was demoted to Ksav Ivri? That's referring to the Egel HaZahav. The Egel HaZahav was a very terse example of idolatry, right? Understood very simply, and because idolatry happened, we were demoted down to Ksav Ivri. So it was not so long after we got Ksav Ashuris at Har Sinai, it was demoted down to Ksav Ivri, right? It was right after. right, between the first and second luchos, right? Moshe came down with the first set of luchos, and he saw us dancing around the egel, and he smashed them, and he smashed them. So from that point on, we were no longer allowed to use Ksav Ashuris. So he goes on to say that the second set of luchos were written in Ksav Ivri, right? So the luchos that were in the Aron through our entire travels in the desert were in Ksav Ivri, the language that we don't understand. This is all in the second opinion. And in the times of Ezra, there was a new era because there is no documented situations in the second base of Mikdash that the Jewish people succumbed to idolatry. In the first base of Mikdash, forget about it. Every second week, there was this Avodah Zarah, the Baal, with this. We were always falling to idolatry. But the second base of Mikdash, that was no longer part of our culture. The Gemara tells us that the rabbis davened to extract the Yetzer Hara for idolatry away from the Jewish people, and they were successful, and it was no longer a thing. So it seemed to be on some mystical level that Ksav Ashuris, the Holy One, could only be with the Jewish people if, excuse my language, if we're not cheating on God. Okay? Therefore, we got it, but the Egel happened, Ksav Ivri. Okay? But in the times of Ezra, in other words, right before the second base of Mikdash was going to be built, at that moment, the precipice in history that we no longer see idolatry plaguing the nation, Ezra was able to bring it back. And that's the Radvaz's take on understanding the history and the dynamic of when we're flip-flopping between Ksav Ashuris and Ksav Ivri. Yes, but he's explaining it. Rabbi Yehuda Nasi just said that the Jewish people sinned and we lost it, and then we stopped sinning and we got it back. Exactly. So let me summarize it like this. To oversimplify, we saw three opinions in the Gemara. The first opinion that the Torah was originally written in Ivri, and Rav Yosef Albo very controversially accepted that opinion. And the Maharal went wild. He said, go to Shul and do kapara. You can't say such a thing. Fine. And then we had a whole host of people, the Rambam and Rabbeinu Hananel and the Radvaz, who all supported, let me just simplify it, either the second or third opinion. But the main thing that they were doing is pushing away the first opinion, that we can't accept that the Torah was given to us in Ksav Ivri. And the Radvaz did a lot of work to try to fill in the gaps in the second opinion, and what it means that we sinned and got demoted down to Ksav Ivri, and then got, in times of Ezra, reinstated Ksav Ashuris. And he basically says it was a sin of idolatry, and the two bookends were Cheta Ego, we lost it, and then right before we built the second base of Mikdash, that's when we see historically that the Jewish people were no longer plagued with idolatry. That's when we got Ksav Ashuris back. Yes.
So a Torah scroll written in Ksav Ivri would not have the status of a Torah scroll written in Ksav Ashuris. According to the way that the vast majority of the opinions, every opinion except for Yosef Albo, so a Torah that's written in Ksav Ivri wouldn't be kosher, right? Yes.
It's interesting, the books that the Rambam wrote in Arabic, he used the Hebrew script.
Yes. No. So I don't think he did. I think that the Arabic that I have in the ones that we were learning together, it was printed in the Hebrew phonics. But I don't think that the Rabbi himself was writing an Arabic script. Yeah, I believe so. Yeah. Anyways, I thought that was a very interesting discovery, and I think that we can go into Shavuos confident that the Torah that we have now is the same as the Torah we have. But it's interesting to know that every interesting discussion has outliers and individual thinkers. And Rabbi Yosef Albo did believe, and he did accept the first opinion of the Gemara that the Torah is written in Ksav Ivri. But again, the vast majority of our commentaries to trail down in the times of the Gaonim and the Rishonim and the Achronim are all of the opinion. Either we accept the second opinion or the third opinion. Happens to be the third one is harder to accept because of all our archaeological discoveries. But they do accept the basic notion that the Ksav Ashuris that we have today is the divinely given script that we still use today. Yes.
Do we have a sense for how many Torahs there were in biblical times? Like right now, every shul has a Torah, there's a Torah, but was it a rare thing that